Would everyone please stand? Dear Lord, we ask your blessings on this board and port and the people who depend upon it. We ask you, God, this board and our decisions, that they are for the good of those we serve. We ask this in your name. Amen.
Amen.
Ms. McClary will lead us in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The board encourages public comments and questions regarding all agenda items. Persons wishing to do so should complete a speaker's card, which is at the entrance to the boardroom. When speaking or asking a question on an agenda item, one should, in addition to completing the card, come to the microphone, be recognized, provide your name, address, and phone number. Comments by individuals will be limited to 3 minutes. First item is the approval of the June 28th, 2021 regular meeting minutes.
Mr. President, I make a motion to approve the June 28, 2021 regular meeting minutes.
Okay.
Second.
Mr. Darbone moves. Mr. Dixon seconds approval of the June 28th regular meeting minutes. Any discussion? No discussion. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Ayes have it. Motion carried. Submission 2021-029 approving and levying for the tax year 2021 an ad valorem millage rate of 2.48 mils. Mr. Self.
Yes, we're requesting approval to adopt a millage rate of 2.48 for 2021. You may recall that in 2020 was a reappraisal year. That takes place every 4 years. And 2020 was the last reappraisal year. The millage rate was 2.53, and in an effort to reduce the tax burden on the taxpayers, we reduced the tax millage rate from 2.53 to 2.48 last year. Because again, this is not a reappraisal year, we're just requesting to keep the millage rate at 2.48.
Do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Mr. Dixon.
Could I ask a question?
When we get it on the floor, we can have the discussion. Mr. Dixon moves. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Prudham. Discussion. Ms. McClary.
Mr. Self, could you refresh my memory about what we did with this millage last year? It seems like we had at some point in 2020 a discussion about the millage. Yeah,
in 2020 we had the option of keeping the rate at 2.53, which was the rate at that time. And again, in an effort to reduce the tax burden on the taxpayers, we reduced the millage rate from 2.53 to 2.48. And we did that in 2020.
And so it's remaining at 2.4.
And this would keep it at that lower 2.48 level.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions? No further discussion. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Ayes have it. Motion carried. Submission 2021-030, authorizing executive director to terminate the ground lease agreement for the BG warehouse site with Lake Charles LNG and Shell Lake Charles operations. Mr. Self.
Yes, in 2005, the port entered into a lease for the turning basin with Trunkline LNG for the land surrounding the turning basin. Then in 2010, Trunkline subleased it to BG. BG constructed a warehouse on about 4.3 acres. The warehouse doesn't cover the 4.3 acres, but they lease about a 4.3 acre site and they have a building there. Hurricane Laura and Delta significantly damaged the building. The lease expires December 31, 2022. We're in the process of trying to get that piece of property back into commerce, and in doing so, Shell, who acquired BG, has offered to pay $350,000 toward the repair of the building and then we would take the lease back. Any other questions?
So, do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Second.
Mr. McCleary moves adoption of 2021-030. Mr. Easton, second. Any discussion?
Question, I guess. Have you since acquired, do we know what the repair costs are going to be?
We're looking at that right now. We don't know the total cost yet.
I mean, is there a windshield estimate?
Nick, I don't know if you have a ballpark estimate?
Actually, no. We're working on that now. We're guessing it's going to be around the 350, but I should explain the $350,000 isn't. It's not a payment towards the repair costs. It's actually half of the estimate they have to demolish the whole building. So instead of demolishing the whole building, they said, "Well, look, we'll give you half of that as part of the payment."
Yeah, that's how we arrived at the $350,000.
This picture that you gave us the other day, this photograph, is this a current photograph? I mean, the roof seems to be intact.
I don't know the date of that picture.
Yeah,
Okay.
I doubt that's.
This structural, there are structural damages to the building.
All right, that's the reason I was asking.
Yeah, I don't know that was really just to give you an idea as to the footprint.
All right.
This was an improvement they made to the property that they subleased, correct?
Yes.
Correct. And so, did they have any requirement to put that back in place, that improvement?
Yeah, at their option, correct me if I'm wrong, John, at their option, they can either demolish the building or repair the building at their option. It was less expensive for them to demolish it, but we'd rather keep the building.
Sure.
So they estimated just over $700,000 to demolish it. So rather than demolish it, they said, well, we'll split it with you 50-50, we'll give you $350,000 toward the repairs, and then we'll have a building on site.
That's correct. Get it back better than we had it. That's right.
That's correct.
Good.
Any other questions or discussion? All those in favor, aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. Ayes have it, motion carried. Submission 2021-031, authorizing the district to enter into a professional service agreement with Rouge LLC.
You may recall earlier this year, we entered into an agreement with Rouge to prepare the bid documents for 2 new ship loaders at BT1. Associated with that, we're requesting authorization this month to enter into a professional services agreement with Bouge excuse me, to design the dock improvements associated with those ship loaders. We used a process that we have in our policy called direct selection because of Bouge familiarity with those 2 cranes. The estimated cost is about $200,000. It's $180,000 plus a $20,000 contingency.
I make a motion to approve submission 2021-031.
Second. Okay, Mr. Lorenzi moves, Mr. Dixon seconds. Submission 2021-031. Any discussion? No discussion. All those in favor, aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. Ayes have it, motion carried. The briefing notes, the first thing we have is a strategic plan briefing note from Mr. Martin.
Good afternoon. Good to be here. Get my glasses. Move this on. Excuse me, Dad. Still not, it's moving on the sides, but not on the. Great. Thank you for inviting us down. We're happy to present the draft final of a summary of the strategic development plan that we started in, I guess it was December early January with Myers and Associates, and so I'll try to keep this brief, maybe about 20 minutes to half an hour. We'll go over the high points, then open it up for questions, if that's okay with everyone. So, with respect to the plan, really the purpose of the plan was to evaluate, look at the historical performances of the port from both financial as well as cargo activity, look at the competitive position of the port, develop long-term growth opportunities of the current cargo base, then look for some potential opportunities that the port is not now involved in, looking at cargo that was previously handled at the port but now maybe an opportunity to get back into that business, and then also new cargo markets that the port could potentially penetrate. Looking at the existing facilities conditions as they are, Myers Associates was involved in looking at current situations, looking at market-driven facilities investments in terms of facilities, new warehouses, et cetera, equipment and infrastructure needs. We then developed facility layout plans. These are all market-driven rather than build it and they come, and then developed probable cost estimates of the recommended capital plan for the investments. With respect to the historical performance of the port, really the port has done very well from a revenue growth standpoint. Peaked in 2017, however, beginning in 2017, 18, and 19, and 20, we've had declining revenue, and we'll talk about what the reason for that was. Costs, on the other hand, have remained relatively constant, except a slight uptick in 2020, and that was resulting of the maintenance and expenses and equipment expenses as a result of the hurricanes. And if we took those out, the costs actually would be about $1.5 million less than what they were in 2019. So from a cost perspective, the port was able to handle the costs. The declining revenue, though, however, was reflective of the change in operating revenue that we're looking at. If you look at the chart which is operating revenue, the blue piece is the revenue from vessel operations and vessel and cargo operations. The red pieces, the red bars are those from the leases, et cetera, from facilities leases. And you can see the decline in revenue is really driven by the decline in cargo and vessel revenue activity. And the majority of that decline was really attributed to the decline that we've seen in coke over time, particularly obviously at BT1. With respect to the operating costs, you can see that the wages and salaries component of the operating costs have remained relatively constant throughout the time period we looked at. The only growth has been in that the area of the maintenance expenses, the blue expenses. That color's a little distorted on that screen, but if you look at it this way, the darker blue is where the maintenance expenses due to the hurricane grew in 2020. So overall, the cost structure was maintained. Revenue decline is due to the declining in the coke revenue. And there you can see when we look at the revenue and operating expenses and develop operating income for your cargo facilities, you can see that BT1 has been your major cash cow, shall we say, with respect to operating income. But when you start to look at what has happened, beginning, like I said, in 2017, there was a decline in that operating revenue. We've seen some growth in operating revenue or operating income due to the growth in the Cameron LNG in 2020. We've also seen decline in the operating revenue, operating income with respect to the city docks as well. When you look at tonnage, really tonnage has been is at a 15-year high in 2020, but that tonnage, as you can see, is driven by the tremendous growth in tonnage with the opening of the Cameron LNG. The other tonnages, as you can see up here, was really your normal base cargoes have remained relatively constant except for the decline in coke, and that's really kind of driving the dynamics of the base cargo business right now. One of the bright spots has been the growth in wind energy that we saw in 2019 and 2020. We've also seen rubber had declined in 2005, 2006 levels, but it's remained relatively stable since 2015. Lumber products and forest products were a key cargo back in 2005 through 2008, but have really declined, and they started to rebound, especially lumber in 2020. And with respect to the bulk rice Bulk grains, that was a strong growth in throughput with respect to the growth in the opening of the elevator. 2018-19 was a down year for many factors. One of the big factors was also the impact of overall grain exports in the U.S. had been low in 2018-19 because of the strength of the U.S. dollar. Also, the entrance of the South American markets in the grain export business, as well as restricted trade policies with respect to China, had impact as well on the bulk grain, et cetera. Looking at a real short synopsis of your existing cargo base, when you look at coke, coke is really a function of petroleum refining, et cetera. Refining has been down, especially due to COVID, but it was also the more domestic crude that is refined versus the heavy crude that's refined, the less production of coke per amount of light refining occurs. Citgo also had one of their trains in their cokers shut down, and it's still shut down. But we're expecting to see some rebound in coke production. We did the forecast using information from the Energy Information Administration. So we're seeing a return. 2020 was around 900,000 tons. It's historically been around 1.8 to 2 million. We're expecting that return, and then basically a flat projection long-term with respect to coke as we find more competition with respect to petroleum refining. LNG clearly has been a big growth market for the port in the last year. We expect from the doubling of LNG exports overall in the U.S., and as more capacity comes online with your additional LNG facilities here in Lake Charles, which you have leases on, we expect that continue to grow over time. Limestone is driven by your construction activity, local regional construction. It had dropped significantly in 2020 because of COVID, but it's picking back up now due to the growth in construction activities, and with some of the new projects, major construction projects coming online in the next 3 to 5 years, we expect that to grow. Really, the growth in limestone will, through your facility, through BT4, will be driven by your capacity limitations at that facility. Barite is a function, obviously, of drilling, and with respect to the U.S. Department of Energy's forecast for drilling activity, expecting that to be relatively flat in the longer term. With respect to the bulk grains and rice, since the opening of the grain elevator, there's been a strong growth in bulk exports. Right now, the discussions with the bulk exporters have talked about a 25% cost savings that elevator is providing them for locally grown bulk grains. We're looking at that grain export activity to return to pre-COVID levels and really have relatively strong growth in the next 3 to 5 years with new contracts that are available, that are becoming online now with export activity. And then we're expecting an overall about a 1.1% growth per year throughout 2040 based on forecasts that the Department of Agriculture develops for what they call the long-term grain outlooks. Bag goods, particularly bag grains, really has been an up and down market for the port. Bag grain activity in 2020 was very low, 47,000 tons. We're seeing a potential return to that on the high side, high scenario side, on a low scenario side. With the growth in containerization of the bag grains, we're seeing that could be impacting throughput through the port for bag grains in the future. But in terms of short term, because of the container availability right now that we're seeing, because of export containers are being moved back to Asia quickly, not being sitting around for export product to be loaded, the empties are being shipped back because they get much higher freight rates to bring the containers back with loaded Asian imports into the United States. The freight rate differential is about 5 times greater on an import than an export. So we're seeing a shortage of empty containers for grain exports. And as a result, we're expecting to see a surge in break bulk bag grain shipments in the near term. With respect to the aluminum trihydrate, that's used primarily in the paper manufacturing businesses, et cetera, and when we're looking at the growth in some of the paper processing in the regional area, in the Oklahoma area, et cetera, we're seeing relatively good growth in the aluminum trihydrate. And rutile is used primarily in the paint and manufacturing industry, pigment, et cetera. There's one of your major consumers of rutile is expanding operations here, and we factored that into the long-term outlook for that product. With respect to new markets, your wind energy market has really boomed in 2019 and 2020. And what's key here is your current customer, that is your major customer for bulk, probably for wind energy, is they base their operations on an inventory supply operation rather than on a project-specific type replenishment of the wind farms. And so you have a much more stable supply of wind energy import business that is going to their various wind farms, primarily in Oklahoma, Wyoming, Nebraska, Kansas, et cetera. Most of it, literally all of it, is moving by unit train. There's a big change in the growth of the size of equipment now. We're going from 42, 44 meter wind component size of the blades, et cetera, to 62 to 70, which means to produce the same amount of energy, you actually need less parts because the pieces are getting bigger. But that also has a very important implication on your logistics inside the terminal, that you can handle and manipulate, move the larger pieces of equipment within the terminal itself, as well as to make sure that you have the rail clearances, et cetera, to move that product out into the hub distribution areas for the wind energy area. That has become a serious concern of pieces between the UP and BN. There's some logistics issues that Ricky, you can talk with and brief you on, working with trying to get some of the logistics issues on the wind energy to run much more smoothly. One of the issues we also have had besides logistics issues is the berth strength. Obviously, berth 9A is usable for wind energy, but they're having, the stevedores are having difficulty moving the bigger pieces of wind energy without using shore cranes. And so it's very important that we have longer term that any new berthing that's built has obviously good floor strength, but also has an apron width that you can bring a shore crane alongside to assist the ship's gear in discharging the wind energy equipment. There is poor access at berth 9A with respect to the open storage areas. There's some very tight turns from what we're hearing from the terminal, from the stevedores, and hoping that that can be corrected. Berth 3 right now is the width between the berth and the warehouses is too narrow, so we're trying to expand that, and we'll see in our recommendations to have a wider berth, wider apron so you can move shore cranes in there. So there also the wire situation on city docks, suggesting that they be buried in order to allow for more fluid in-terminal flow. In order to keep attracting more wind energy, the port's going to have to be continually working with the wind farms and the OEMs, as well as the, specific logistics companies that are involved in handling the wind energy pieces, such as TP&L. Obviously, rail situated with the BN and UP on the trackage rates, et cetera, operations needs to be resolved, because if that's not resolved, that's really not going to, the outlook for the long term on wind energy is not strong. But with it being resolved, there is strong outlook for the wind energy onshore. The lumber market has become a tremendously growing business here at the port. It's used to serve not the regional retail markets. It's going a lot to the retail outlets, retail locations. One of the big drivers, obviously, has been recovery and repair from the hurricanes. That's grown the volume. But it's very important when we're talking with the lumber importers and the carriers that are bringing the lumber in, that we need to have availability of good warehouse coverage storage, also efficient truck operation and efficient labor operations. The growth in in lumber is strong. We're projecting some pretty strong growth, about 3% over the next 3 to 5 years, and then about 1 to 2% per year after that. But European lumber is the market right now that we're seeing tremendous growth in, especially in prices as well. With respect to the kind of the base cargo business, you know, with the decline in the coke and kind of like the kind of stagnant nature of your existing cargo base, with the exception of the lumber and the wind energy, you know, it's very important that we look to diversify that cargo, particularly that cargo handled at city docks. One of the key things that we're going to be looking at, that we looked at for that, was the development of new up-to-date clear span warehousing on city docks. And also, we'll need some additional open terminal space for any laydown of wind energy, as well as project cargo business. With respect to new markets, you know, one of the markets that had been looked at by carriers and by the pulp exporters was the pulp business back in the early 2000s. Port Arthur and Beaumont have really secured that market now since the 2000s. They're working with handling Savannah, El Dorado, and Cenebra pulp operations. For the port to get back in that business, obviously, warehousing is critical, but also development with terminal operators that are tied in tightly with the Savannah, El Dorado, and Cenebra importers. There's very strong relationships with specific stevedores that are handling that business now, and that's really critical in moving that. Most of the pulp right now is coming out of Beaumont and Port Arthur, and it's going into Oklahoma for consumption in that market there. But really, it's very important that they have clear span warehouses with adequate force strength. G2 is critical in marketing this opportunity, the gear, bulk, and star operations. And, you know, it's very going to be difficult to get that market, but we're looking at potential for 10 to 15% of the existing 700,000 tons that move through Beaumont, Port Arthur is a reasonable market expectation, with some very specific marketing opportunities, particularly for the El Dorado business, because a lot of the other business is much more tied up with specific terminal operators. The wood pellets and wood chips, to me, becomes a very interesting opportunity for the port, particularly at city docks. The pellet market has been growing very strongly in the Gulf. Baton Rouge grew from 0 tons of wood pellets in 2014 to 1.3 million tons in 2020. That's Drax's operation in Baton Rouge. Panama City, Florida, is also a major export facility for wood pulp. That's operated by Adviva Biomass. And we've had long discussions with the pellet exporters along with the port. The next move that the pellet exporters are looking at is to move into the West Gulf, with particular focus here in the Lake Charles area. So that has become a very important market for the port to look at. It's very important to be able to market your fiber supply. You need to have on-dock rail access. You need to have suitable storage for the facility with their domes or flat storage. Domes are in New Orleans, flat storage is in Panama City. And water depth, we really need to have about a 40-foot water depth class vessels to handle the pellets, because they're usually loading to that depth. Wood chips market is a parallel market with that, with the pellets. It's a growing market, particularly right now. Pacific Northwest and Southeastern United States are involved in the pellet or in the chip business. The big growth right now is from China, because China had historically imported waste paper from the United States. American Chun-Nam was the major, actually, containerized exporter for years out of the United States, and that was handling all waste paper that was going to China to feed their paper facilities. There were 7 major paper facilities in China. Obviously, in the last 2 years, China has placed a large amount of restrictions on imported waste paper and scrap from all countries, particularly from the United States. So what China is now doing is starting to import wood chips to make their own pulp operations. So chips has become very important export to China, as well as they are also, China's also importing pulp as well, directly actually from Brazil for their operations. But there's a potential to piggyback on the pellet operations along with the chip operations. like I said, to convert this opportunity, it's important to have a terminal operator or a biomass operation that will come and put the investments into the port facility. What they typically do, they look to find out where the fiber supplies are, typically within about 150 miles of the port. These companies such as Draxler and Aviva then go and negotiate with the counties in which those biomass or the pellet, the fiber facility, the fiber market is there. They then develop their own pellet production plants and then try to move that by rail as well as by truck directly onto the port for export. And discussions we've had with the biomass producers who are looking at Lake Charles right now, they're looking at about 750,000 tons in 8 years. Chips are somewhere between 50 and 100,000 tons. So that market is strong, but really there's facilities investments that will be required. We looked at the fertilizer market because there's been historically a lot of fertilizer that seems to be handled in New Orleans, Gramercy, and Galveston that's coming into this area. Africa has been the emerging market with respect to fertilizer imports. There's been strong growth in the African import business. It really, literally, all of it comes into the Gulf Coast now, and again, it's dominated by New Orleans and Gramercy. We've talked with a lot of the fertilizer import operations, CHS, for example, down in Galveston. And right now, the Lake Charles market is actually relatively small because a lot of it's being fulfilled out of New Orleans and Gramercy, so there's a relatively small market. There's still an opportunity for it, but it's probably not as strong as we thought initially after we started to find out where the other sites were that they were bringing the fertilizer into and then serving the Lake Charles market from there. With respect to project cargo, again, a big opportunity we're seeing, especially with the 4 or 5 major projects coming on underway. Lake Charles, the methanol, Venture Global Driftwood, the Lake Charles conversion, Lake Charles LNG conversion, Magnolia LNG. All of those are going to be requiring some important project cargo operations. One of the sites we've looked at for that is the use of the industrial canal facilities. We'll talk about the facilities development there shortly. But we need 40 feet of water. Again, on-dock rail is going to become important because you need to, some cases, not only load off the ship onto a barge, but in other cases, load off the ship onto rail live loads. So those are all important. And additionally, the wind energy business is becoming, gaining a lot of attention in the Gulf right now. There's some offshore identification. Actually, the West Coast, the western portion of Louisiana has some of the strongest winds in the Gulf. Then you get down to Brownsville, that has the other stronger winds when you look at wind contour maps. So there's interest in wind energy development in this area. When you look at the different types of types of logistic steps within wind energy for the offshore support, you have your manufacturing side where you do your monopiles, which are the big anchor devices you put the towers in. Those are right now south in New Jersey. Paulsboro, New Jersey is the first major manufacturing site of those to serve the offshore energy market in New Jersey. But that's a possibility to look at for monopile manufacturing. EES is the major developer of that. Then we also have logistics centers that we could look at for offshore support, particularly in the industrial canal area. That's handling the nacelles, the blades, the towers, and also cable. A lot of times people forget about cable, but that's becomes very important that you're able to store cable equipment, cable to connect the towers, et cetera. And also cable manufacturing. We're looking at one of those for a small port in New Jersey right now, in Salem, New Jersey. So those all present some opportunities here that the port can be looking at with respect to the offshore wind. Also, as the offshore wind develops, you're looking at equipment storage, maintenance storage, that you can run, that you'll be running shuttle boats out into those areas. And like I said, the vessel support for lay berthing, for cabling, for monitoring the towers, inspections, and for crew, all become important. And the industrial canal property looks like a very interesting property for that type of development. Also, for additional growth and opportunities for land, for the onshore wind that we talked about that's being here at City Dock, looking at more project-specific rather than the inventory control as your client, your OEM has here on City Docks, another Another new client sometimes would be having more project-specific, which would then be compatible with the development of the industrial canal property. And what's important there is you need rail. Rail's not there. You'll see is Mars & Associates have developed the rail opportunity for that. With respect to facilities development, if we want to get down to city docks, clearly the reinforcement of the dock strength at the city docks is absolutely critical. And one of our recommendations, if as you're rebuilding these docks, especially those that were damaged by the hurricane that were very old to begin with, I would recommend, and we can discuss this, go into 45 feet, that it would maintain a 45-foot channel, even though that's a long-term potential to deepen the channel. It's been looked at for years. But if you're going to redo the berths, you might as well make them to have the strength to go down to 45 feet, so you don't have to redo them if you get deeper water. So that's for alongside depth. We definitely need to have improved circulation for wind energy equipment, particularly from dock 9A to open storage area, burying the overhead wires to improve the internal supply chain logistics within the city docks area. We're recommending 250 to 200,000 square foot clear span warehouses to replace those 14 damaged, and you are doing some of those replacements. You'll see how this fits with your existing capital development plan. So we need two of those 150 to 250,000 square foot warehouses. Also, development of 1 or 2 clear span warehouses along berth 4, 5, and 6. And you'll see why I said 1 or 2. We also recommend you develop a ro-ro ramp for project cargo operations as well, and on-dock rail at city docks for any project cargo with open access for the laydown area if necessary. That's particularly for project cargo and to support the growth of wind energy from your existing OEM. Purchase of 2 harbor cranes to assist in the wind energy and project cargo to assist the ship's gear. Remove and relocate the Firestone warehouse to an off-dock location, since that operation handles only cargo that does not go over the docks. So you don't want to put warehouse space that's not using dock space on a marine terminal. We have a space to move that. And then to develop a scenario for wood pellet facility that would have a conveyor offloading system, outload system, rail dumping facility, et cetera, and space for a 50-car minimum unit train rate access for the pellets. The first recommendation, we suggest the old warehouse 9. I know you use it for overflow storage, but it's not in good shape, and there's a lot of warehouse space that we're suggesting be developed, more modern warehouse space. That would improve the circulation flow off of 9A into that open storage area for the wind energy. We're also recommending that you build a heavy lift capable berth along berth 7 and 8 with approximately 1,600 linear feet, a berth for heavy lift operations, and then build a ro-ro ramp either at the south end of berth 6 or the north end of berth 7 to allow that access into the open storage area. The second recommendation, and this is where I said, remember I said 1 or 2 warehouses along 4, 5, and 6. In this case, we would first build, replace the 14 warehouses in the middle with 200,000 square foot warehouses, clear span in the middle, put a new 150,000 square foot warehouse at the 4th, and then also bring a rail on dock. That's one possibility, bring rail on dock on berth 6. However, if the other option is to build still put the 150,000 square foot warehouses within the 14 warehouse space, but then have a full 200,000 square foot warehouses along berth 4, 5, and 6, and have that rail come in the back. Those would be 2 possibilities that we're seeing as an opportunity there, and and Chuck has, Mars & Associates has estimated that would be an additional $8.3 million to build that additional warehouse behind 6. Just to give you an example, we talk about clear span warehouses. That's an example of a clear span warehouse where you can stack and you have no pillars, et cetera, inside, so you have the flow within the warehouses themselves. Then we're also talking about potential for the wood pellet operation. Again, you don't do this unless you have a commitment and contracts with a biomass manufacturer that would do this, but leave area for, here we have two 45,000 square foot domes on city docks, but we could also use flat storage. And the reason I say that, this is the Baton Rouge operation, this is the Drax operation in Baton Rouge with their with the domes, and then here's your flat storage you have at Panama City and Savannah. Both of those are flat storage. Oftentimes, flat storage becomes the preferred mode because it allows you to minimize the heat concentration of the pellets within the warehouse themselves. They're very specific requirements for a pellet facility in order to minimize potential for overheating of the pellets. This is just an example. Myers and Associates put this together. We have each project, as you know, described in detail, the costs associated with each project at City Docks, which is in the larger document. With respect to the industrial canal property, we talked about that for offshore project cargo, offshore wind, onshore wind. On-dock rail capability is critical. 650 series harbor cranes necessary. Clearly must have dock integrity strength in order to handle heavy lift equipment. And we're extending the rail to come in directly into the industrial canal property, which provides the on-dock rail capability that we talked about. With respect to BT1, basically, a lot of this is being undertaken now, and this is replacement of equipment and upgrades as a result of the hurricanes. I'm not going to read all of that. It's various equipment purchases, et cetera, that are required to upgrade the outloading systems, et cetera, and the ship loaders due to the hurricane. And then with respect to Industrial Park East, this is where we're suggesting to develop a warehouse that would handle the Firestone operations, because most of that rubber is actually containerized and trucked to Houston. So it's not going over the City Docks operation, but this would provide Firestone with the capability of having that type of an access at the industrial property with rail and with truck delivery. And with respect to adjacent land improvements, the methanol development plant that's underway, and the port is going to participate in equipment purchases for that, for the facility development for the methanol facility. And what we've done is summarize the costs. These are very detailed costs, but in a summary form. And there's the last column shows what is already included in your capital development plan. The other column is the probable cost estimates that Myers and Associates has developed for all the projects, but it shows which ones are included in your capital development plan and which ones are not included in your capital development plan. And with that, I open it up for questions.
Mr. Martin? I mean, I'm staring at $321 million, you know, which is obviously a wonderful number. I wish we could all access that. Probably realistically, we'll be looking at 10% of that on an annual basis. Is that fair on capital outlay and on a wish? Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, and remember, like when we put in there about the domes for the wood pellets, et cetera, that's not you just build a dome to attract someone. That has to be a market-driven and a contract negotiations of that. So these are the probable cost estimates, not necessarily phased, because it's really to be when the markets drive it. The warehouses are critical. You're already rebuilding 3, 4, 5. And 6. Those are critical. The clear span, I mean, the warehouses are in bad shape. The ability, you're already putting one warehouse in the middle of where the 14 warehouses are. That's already included. We're really putting in much more modern warehouse space because you can capitalize on the destruction of some of the warehouses that obviously occurred because of the hurricane.
And where I was going with this is clearly we deal with a lot of various commodities and different types of shipments that we have in and out of here. And I was looking at a lot of the things we talked about, and I saw a lot of 1% compounded annual growth rates going forward,
Yeah.
which is not real lucrative.
Right.
And I go back to a 10% number of what we might be able to be looking at on an annual basis. You know, so using that compounded annual growth, and I would assume 5 years is tough to do right now on a growth rate, much less 10.
Yeah.
But
Well, that's in your base commodities, remember?
Sure.
That's your base commodities. So the critical thing here is to be able to diversify into these markets that we're talking about. Wind energy, the pellets, the chips, those markets become, moving forward. The development of the industrial canal, the industrial canal property, that's important because the growth and the interest in project cargo with all the different projects that are coming online, the local projects that are coming online. So those are all factors that are necessary. But the warehouses are critical.
Yeah, and where I was really going with this at the end is, using a cost-benefit analysis. We've got a finite amount of money we've got that we can invest back into the port on an annual basis. Using that cost-benefit approach, what is the best bang for our buck going forward over the next 5 to 7 years that we can enhance revenues and increase employment for the Southwest Louisiana?
Yeah.
I mean, all I've heard is if you build it, they may not come.
Right.
You've got to have a client before you build it.
Exactly. Exactly, and that's what.
So, to Mr. Easton's question, what's our best bang for the buck?
Really, the reconstruction of the warehouses that you're doing now, the development of modern clear span warehouses, they've clearly been an issue for business development over the past. They have to be rebuilt now. There's a demand for them from the lumber perspective, et cetera. Those are really where your bang is going to come immediately. If, in fact, you have discussions, and we don't want to get into too much detail about the discussions with the pellet manufacturing in this session, but depending upon how that comes, that's very important. Also discussions you're having with project cargo, potential businesses on the industrial canal, that's very important. But again, those are all billed if they're here, for negotiations. Do not build for them to come.
Ms. McClure?
So recently, I read an article that spoke of the decline in the market for pet coke, and that it was impacting, actually did not mention the Port of Lake Charles, but it did talk about Houston, maybe Galveston, and New Orleans, let's say. There were 3 specific ports that they mentioned. So I noticed that in your report, you talk about the decline in pet coke. So this actually would be no different in that decline if you were making this strategic plan for one of those as well. So I guess my question is, it's not because of a lack of something here, it is market-driven.
Yes.
And to what degree would you say that would be COVID-related?
I think it's 2 things. Obviously, coke's produced from petroleum refining, right? Mm-hmm. So obviously, with the production and driving, et cetera, down because of COVID, there was a decline. But that happened before that. If you started to look at those charts, we saw that petroleum decline, the pet coke decline, or the coke reduction started in 2017. So there's a couple of things that is problematic when you look at coke production. Obviously, the more domestic petroleum that's refined, the less bang for your buck you get from coke production. It's the heavy crude, which is the imported crude, particularly the South American crude, and I think Middle Eastern crude. Heavier crude, you can produce more coke. When you do the distillation process, coke occurs. So the more that we reduce U.S. imports of heavy crude and rely on domestic produced, lighter crude, you get less coke production. So that's one thing. Second of all, with the growth in alternative fuels and clean energy, et cetera, electric vehicles and so forth and so on, your demand for petroleum products at some point will be starting to dwindle because of gasoline production, et cetera. So when you look at that, that's why we're saying it's pretty much flat out into the future. And that's our high projection. If you look at the low projection, we have a decline in coke production, in coke exports.
But you do show considerable growth in that market.
That's the high forecast, but there's another forecast
And
that,
so what would your low forecast be?
it's a declining forecast. It's in the major report.
So I guess the question is, it's not particular to the Port of Lake Charles.
It's not.
This is
It's
something
not.
that is just happening in the market
Yes.
because of various factors.
And what they're looking at now, because coke is used so much for fuel sources, for steel manufacturers, et cetera, there's much more interest now on more and more scrap being used in the blast furnaces, et cetera, for steel production.
So in our current product mix, what we have now, you have a couple of pages, is there anything in particular here that you see that the Port of Lake Charles needs to do differently in order to regain or increase that market that
Yes.
we're not doing now? Not on the speculative side of, why don't you, maybe you should look into this, but on our current product mix, or
Yeah, I mean,
what we currently import, export. What's our biggest opportunity or our
yes.
least opportunity?
I think one of the biggest potential right now is to try to follow up and convert on the pellet operation. That there's interest, they're moving, after Pascagoula's finished, the next spot they're looking to develop is in the West Gulf, which is right here. That's a big number. The second piece that's becoming very important is to solidify yourself in the wind business, the wind energy business. But logistics is absolutely critical for the wind farm business. And there's been some real strong hiccups between the BN and UP in terms of moving logistics, the rail situation with your existing customer now. That's very important to grow that business. And
John, I
that's-
think she's asking of our current
Yeah.
cargoes that we handle, is there something we need to do differently that we're not doing today?
I'm sorry, with respect to your current cargoes, obviously, coke is out of your, you can't do much about coke because we just talked about
That's
that,
the- yeah.
okay?
Okay.
The bagged grains, which has been a historically very important piece of business here for Lake Charles, is probably not a huge growth market because we have so much competition from containerization of the bag of grain, whether it's privately sold or whether it's FDA, Food for Peace grain. And it's been eroding, the market's been eroding for bagged grains over time as it moves towards containerization, okay? So you don't have a whole lot of control over that. With respect to the rutile, that is being consumed locally by a major manufacturer here who is expanding. With respect to your bulk grains, that is a focus of the fact that the elevator is offering a 25% cost savings, logistics, transportation cost savings to the local bulk export grain. That's an important market, okay?
That makes us competitive.
That makes you competitive. So with respect, that's why I'm saying, so it's important to look at these new markets, which is why we're talking about growing the wind energy business, growing the project cargo business, growing more and more the lumber, the forest products business. And that was directly dependent upon the fact that warehouses were in really bad shape in the 2000s, in the mid-2000s, so forth and so on. And now why did lumber come back? Because the warehouses are so full every place else, in Beaumont, Port Arthur, and Houston, et cetera, that this is the next best place because there was some availability of warehouse space, which is not good. It's not in good shape. I'm sure you can talk to the, if we have stevedores in here, the facilities are antiquated. They're antiquated facilities. So on city docks. Then with respect to the getting into the project cargo business and maybe offshore support or other heavy industrial manufacturing, you have the important piece there of the industrial canal property, which is why we want to bring rail in there. That'll give it much more flexibility and competitive piece because you have a nice piece of land there, but you need the rail to get in there. So those are new markets that you have to get into.
Thank you.
Because your base cargo is pretty stagnant.
Well, because it says we've been facing this declining revenue, I guess what I'm saying is, what are we currently handling that maybe we could grow more? And what are the items that, no matter what we do, it's not going to be much growth in it.
You saw that chart with BT1.
Right.
I mean, BT1 dominated, it dominated your net income over the years. So it's hard to grow that other businesses because they're not a lot of the stuff that you handle is under your control. It's kind of state market. But there are new markets that we talked about, and it's important that the lease structures then are developed to reflect not only a ground lease but also throughput leases to allow you to participate in the growth of the volumes of the cargo from a revenue perspective as well. So when you look at new lease structures for different product lines, for new product, you want to have a base lease, but you also want to have a throughput lease too, so you share in the growth of the cargo from a revenue perspective.
But in those new markets, sometimes change is difficult, behavior is difficult to change. So we're actually going to try to go out and capture cargo
Right.
from a competing port. It's not that it's opening a new market.
No, the pellet business is opening a new market because they're moving from Florida, Pascagoula, Mississippi, Baton Rouge, as they move
They're
west.
not necessarily moving, they're just migrating this way, and it's a new market for
Yeah, it's a new
Offshore.
market.
Thank you.
On the, while you're talking about the pellets, John, I know there was a recently announced plant that's going to be built. It's going to take sugar cane bagasse and turn it into a fuel pellet. Is there any differential in the need of the capital structure or infrastructure to handle a fuel pellet of that nature versus a pellet of wood pellet?
Yeah, and I'm not an engineer that can answer that, but I would suspect that you need to have different facilities. You can't commingle sugarcane pellet with a softwood pellet versus a hardwood pellet and so forth and so on. But that's something, if you have a pellet producer or manufacturer, biomass manufacturer engaged in your facility, that's another line of business that is similar to the pellet export, to the chip export. It's the same type of operation. And that's why it's very important to be going after like an Enviva or a Drax or someone like that to become a partner with the port in developing that growth market.
John, one last question. I guess probably the greatest concern in the private world out there today is management of operational expenses looking forward. Is it fair to say that equally important to where we choose to invest in the future for whatever commodity or business we choose to pursue, it's equally important to operate as efficiently and manage expenses to the optimum in order to be successful?
Absolutely, and I think that's one of the things that we're looking at when we talk about some of the logistical changes within the terminal itself to get the flows moving along better. That improves the efficiencies, reduction of double handling, and so forth and so on. All those are critical, and all those are kind of non-structural type of investments that have to be made at the port from the port standpoint.
Any other questions?
Just want to clarify, if I could, on your summary of probable costs, you have a total of $321 million. But if I'm following this correctly, you're saying that of that, $229 million of that is already included in the 5-year.
Yeah, I mean, if you go along on those sides,
Where it says
Chuck,
included.
you might want to answer that, but they are.
About 70% of those costs are already included.
Right, so
You're looking at
it's only the city
92
docks.
million.
If my math is correct, or if my calculator on my phone's correct, you're proposing $67 million in additional projects for city docks.
Right.
And $24,750,000 for the industrial. canal.
Exactly.
But as far as the industrial park and BT1, that's all included already,
Yes.
according to your chart.
Yes.
So it's really the city docks that is the weak link. I know that's the warehouse issue
Right.
primarily. All right.
Anyone else have any questions? Any of the staff have any comments or questions? Okay, well, thank you, John.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks to this, by the way, the staff's been very engaged in helping us with information. I want to just thank
Can I ask one
the
last
staff for that, too.
When you do these, when you take a look at ports elsewhere, is dredging deeper and rail access a common issue, a common problem?
Let me just say this. Dredging is always a problem, or is always an issue. Everybody wants deeper water. And when I talk about 40 feet of water, and when I talk about when you're rebuilding a dock to go so you can withstand 45 feet alongside, the incremental cost alongside is probably relatively minor than ripping the whole thing down again and and having to build it back up again. If you build it for 40 feet and all of a sudden, for some act of greatness that we were able to get a deeper channel, then you don't have to rebuild the dock strength, since you just rebuild, because they're, 30-year life expectancy of a dock. So, hopefully within that time period, we can go to 42 maybe, so forth and so on. But that's a major issue. The rail here, in my opinion, is a problem. Okay. Rail is a problem. Rail is probably one of the big, I think your warehouse situation's a serious problem, and your rail interface between BN and UP and Port Rail. That is an issue that is very critical to get that resolved, because that will kill the wind energy business. I'm serious, that will kill the wind energy business.
Can I make a comment on the rail issue? That is being taken care of. I mean, not taken care of, it's been worked on now in regards to, we've hired R.L. Banks to talk to both of the carriers, and Gulfstream spoke to me last week and said that as far as the dimensional loads with the towers, we were having issues with BN and UP because there was only a very small window that the trains, excuse me, were allowed to leave on. They had like one day. They had to be there by Saturday, and if they didn't make Saturday, then they had to wait another whole week to catch that window. And they have changed that. They're giving us a larger window now to get those trains through. So John may not be aware of that. We have making some strides in that effort to improve our rail logistics. So.
And we have as Todd mentioned, we've engaged R.L. Banks to help us on that rail side, and we have a conference call with them next week to get an update with the first one.
John, let me maybe think of another question while we're talking about all of this is, one of the things I see out there in the industry around the world right now is industries are also trying to be as efficient as possible in their entire business model. Do you see any opportunities? I mean, we have a lot of infrastructure around here, not only our ship channel, the rail right here and, airstrips around here. Do you see any opportunity where the port could potentially partner with another entity that would attract new industry to this area?
I mean, one of the big things, obviously, was the development of methanol facilities. Methanol plants, for the last 5 to 10 years, were a big deal all over the Gulf. You're working with 2 of the methanol facilities now. That's very important, that partnership, and the fact that you can negotiate good lease structures with them to bring some revenue into you, but also provide them with the infrastructure from a waterside standpoint, but also from the project cargo business to be able to bring big pieces of equipment in and then use it. That's a very important piece. We looked years ago at the Chenault facility, not for you, but for another entity here in Lake Charles, to look at it from a distribution logistics hub. One of the thoughts was to look at bringing rail. Right now, intermodal rail service comes out of Los Angeles, Long Beach, typically goes into these containers, comes into Dallas, Fort Worth, and that gets distributed to the distribution centers throughout Texas and brings up in here to Louisiana. One of the thoughts was there was a possibility to bring containers into the Chenault, the airport site, et cetera, and to develop that as a logistics distribution center. I think they are pursuing to talk to developers about that opportunity. It's a tough market to get into because right now, Houston has become so focused on attracting first inbound port calls away from Los Angeles, Long Beach, the San Pedro ports, that right now the distribution center development's occurring in Houston, port-centric, because of the 24-hour e-commerce and so forth and so on, being developed in Austin, has been developed in San Antonio, Texas. Pardon me. New Orleans is about to build a new container terminal, as you know, south of the existing facilities. So that whole concept of the intermodal connectivity and the intermodal distribution center probably, and I don't want to go on the record and make any public statement, but it's a little different than it was maybe 7 years ago because of all these dynamics that are changing with respect to container business. But I think the port, with its ability to provide infrastructure, say, for the Firestone facility out at the Industrial East property, is very important because they don't use the port, but that facilitates their loading of containers and truck it down to Houston. You know, we did look at the opportunity to use container on barge here, but the complexities and the costs of that really were not economically competitive with the way things are done now. So, I mean, I think project cargo is a big market. I think the offshore wind energy, as much as they're starting to look at it in the Western Gulf area, that's becoming important. I think the project cargo business with the 5 or 6 different projects you have going on now are critical. And I think the biomass business is clearly a win-win. I mean, we're working on biomass as far north as Beldoon, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick right now, and Humboldt Bay, California. And so, you know, that's really a big market right now, and especially towards the Asian business. Because historically, the Draxons were supplying their power facilities in the UK with pellets because of the carbon footprints, et cetera. But pellets actually have a higher carbon, or just as high a carbon footprint as does coal on a per megawatt basis. But it's produced with renewable energy, and that's why it's been the preferred choice. But pellets now are being eyed, particularly in Japan, is becoming a real hot area for pellet growth, for utility, and for also other manufacturing fired facilities. That's why I keep going back to pellets. I mean, biomass is very important. And it goes back to the change in the dynamics of the petrochemical business. I mean, that has clearly long-term world impacts that are impacting petroleum production. And that affects coke production, and that affects, you know, all the EVs, you know. All the European cars going to, electric vehicles by what, 2026 or something? You know, the Audis and the Porsches and Volvos, whatever. So those are outside dynamics that you have no control over. So I think the clean energy business is really, I hate to say it when I'm in the heart of the petrochemical business, but the clean energy is really where the ports are really starting to capitalize on, if you're not a container port.
Okay. Thank you again, John.
Thank you. Appreciate all your help and all your input. Thank you.
Next, Executive Director, quarterly expense briefing note.
And it's just a briefing note to report my quarterly expenses. If you have any questions on that, I'll try to answer those.
No questions. Forecast 2, financial briefing note.
Yes, sir. So I'm going to start with the 6 months ended June 30th, 2020. So January through June year to date, we generated revenues of about $17.6 million, which is about $1.4 million unfavorable to budget due to multiple commodities coming in under budget. Lower pet coke due to lower demand for refined crude oil products. Lower windmill blade traffic due to some changes in manufacturing and distribution methods, and then some lower bulk grain associated with the IFG facility. The lower revenue was offset by calcined coke and barite coming in a little higher than budget, as well as some revenues associated with the proposed project and reimbursement for some damage repairs. Expenses were around $21.7 million. And that's actually favorable, which you would expect to see when revenues are down you would also expect to see expenses down. So expenses were down $2.5 million, primarily again due to the lower tonnages and some lower than expected crane decommissioning expenses that were completed in 2020, but were actually set for budget in 2021. Non-operating revenues were $1.4 million, coming in significantly unfavorable, primarily due to the timing of the receipt of our insurance proceeds, which we've been in touch with our adjuster, and we expect those very soon. EBITDA was 2.7, and we generated cash flows of $4.1 million. On to the forecast, this includes January through June actual and then July through December's forecast numbers. We expect at year end to have revenues of around $36.6 million, still unfavorable $1.4 million, and that's primarily due to the effects of the first half of the year with the lower pet coke, lower windmill blades. And we also expect another offset due to the higher lease revenue associated with the long-term lease with Driftwood. Expenses we expect to be around 44.7, again still favorable around 2.5 due to the first half of the year lower expenses, and also due to the timing of some of the completion of some of our projects, creating a lower depreciation expense. We expect non-operating revenues and expenses to be around $24.3 million, resulting in a favorable budget to actual variance of $900,000. Due to lower P3 payment, we budgeted $3 million, and our payment this year was actually only $2.5. We also expect to receive an additional $500,000 on our reimbursement for the insurance proceeds as a reimbursement for our deductible that we paid. EBITDA we expect to be around 5.8, and cash flow we expect to have around $31 million. On the balance sheet, unrestricted cash decreased 16.2 as in previous months. It's due to hurricane payments, the reservation of the self-insured retention, and the payment of the property insurance premium. Restricted cash went up 8.3 due to the funds for the P3, the Calcasieu River Fund, and the self-insured retention that we reserved. Trade accounts receivable went up 3.4. I sent y'all all a recap of that. I sent it a little late, and I apologize for that. In the future, it will go out a little earlier so y'all can review it before the meeting. Most of that is FEMA receivable money that we expect to receive for Hurricane Laura. Fixed assets went up $7.1 million due to the mobile harbor crane. I have a misprint here. Construction in progress actually increased $800,000. I have decreased. I apologize. That's due to multiple hurricane projects getting started and then some projects being completed and being capitalized. Current liabilities went down $600,000 due to payments, hurricane payments, and long-term debt decreased $1.2 million due to the payment on the outstanding bonds. Also in your packet on the next page, you'll see the traffic forecast. So this will compare 2020's actual to what we forecast traffic to be at the end of 2021, and also compared to what we budgeted. You'll see, as mentioned, green coke is down. You'll see windmill blades are also down, but there are also some commodities that are up. So you have calcined coke, we expect to be a little bit higher, which it was higher in the first half. And obviously LNG has well surpassed its budget every month so far. The next few pages are the financials, which we just went over, and you'll also find the capital projects, total expected 2021 versus what we budgeted at the beginning of the year. And again, we're very favorable, and that's due to the timing of some of the projects, as well as one large project that has been delayed. Any questions? All right.
Cameron, thank you for sending that receivable and the aging report. And
Yes, sir.
like I said, I really haven't had time to look at it good, but
I apologize for that.
quick question. I know we've got apparently $3.4 million that's over 120 days. How do you account for that on your balance sheet? Are you taking a charge to, when it gets over 120 days, you still count it as a good receivable or current receivable, or how is that handled on the financial statement?
It varies depending on whether or not we deem it to be collectible or not. If it's deemed uncollectible, we book a reserve. So when you book a reserve, the asset or the invoice that you build that customer stays on the books as a receivable or as an asset, and as their contra account, which is an allowance for doubtful accounts, is also booked. So it depends on what customer and how specific, whether or not we deem it can be collectible, or if they don't have the wherewithal to pay, things like that.
Is our reserve account somewhat close to the over 120 number?
I would say the reserve account is really close to that, probably, and I don't want to give you a percentage, but
Right.
it's,
Yeah.
If it's over in the 120 column, it's most likely been reserved. I'm not going to make a guarantee, but it's most likely been reserved.
Yeah.
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 Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Do you have any more on administration, finance, and security?
My main thing is, as I mentioned, we expect to receive those insurance funds pretty soon. I've been in touch with our representative and adjuster, and they seem like it should be in the next few days. But I know we had a board member that wanted to hear from our reps with CSRS, so let them take over.
Okay. Good a time as any.
Evening, Mr. President, fellow board members. Last month, we reported we finally broke through that insurance barrier that was holding us back on submitting projects. Once that was solved, we immediately pushed in 20 projects from the June report, totaling approximately $4.6 million. CSRS has been busy this month. We've included another, I think we're up to 35 now that have been submitted. Last month it totaled $4.6 million. This month it's jumped up to $39.5 million. So it's quite a big jump. A lot of those projects were some of the largest damaged items that the port sustained. Hopefully the CRC, where they review the projects, will move them through quickly. I checked right before the meeting. I see of the 20 we originally had submitted for last month's report, 13 are already nearing completion, totaling $2.7 million. And the larger the project, like if it's over $1 million, it will have to go through a second review process in DC through OMB. So those will take longer to get through the review process. Currently, a total of all the DIs, it fluctuates each month depending on when we get to actual costs or estimates. And right now, we're at about $103 million. Do you have any questions for me?
I have a question. So basically 29% of the projects are now in the hands of FEMA, correct? And that's the total.
You
of
testing my math, Judy?
39. Correct, is that?
Yeah, I look more at the dollar figure. So,
Okay. Well, I'm looking at this, it says 29%.
okay.
So, and I know you've been very diligent in getting the big ticket items in first, which makes sense.
Yeah, we originally aligned with Nick and his group on the repair projects. So hopefully when you guys start paying the contractors, the money will be there besides the insurance money. You've received half the insurance money. The other half should be coming in soon, according to Cameron. And hopefully these FEMA projects will go through and get obligated. So the money will be there also. Right now we have 40 million out of just over 100 million. So about 40% of the money has been submitted for FEMA review and obligation.
40% of the total.
Approximately.
29% is of the projects,
Of the damage inventory.
of the
yes.
damage inventory.
Correct.
And so can we assume then that now they will happen a little quicker? I mean, we're looking at a year out, so I understand why it's taken this long, but with the other, the remainder, because they are smaller projects, would they be easier? Will it happen more quickly for the other 71%, or?
Well, if you look at the listing of the damage inventory items, if you notice, you go about 20,000. That's like the last 20,000 and under is about 44 damage inventory items. So that's out of 120. So although they're small dollar figures, they still require a lot of input on our part. And the priority's not with those items right now. We're following direction of the port management.
No, I get it.
So to answer your question, yeah, things seem to be going smoother now. We get to those last little items, sometimes those take some of the longest as far as that group of 44. But hopefully, most of those those DIs are grouped together. We can submit 5 to 10 at a time, so that should speed those up as well.
I was actually going to hit on that, Ms. Judy, as well. We actually met with Glenn on Friday. We're trying to consolidate a lot of the smaller projects to group them together so that he doesn't have to answer, 50 questions on a $5,000 project. We can at least lump it together, and he'll answer, 50 questions on a $20,000 project. So.
Well, I know we had a delay because of the insurance, and now that has been resolved. And so that we lost some time on that in terms of getting reimbursements. So I guess what I'm saying is, can we assume that those remaining projects, where we have 29% of them submitted, almost a year out, to get the other 71%, if my math is correct, that will be another year or 2 years, or?
Well, it's hard to estimate. The larger the project, like I'm personally involved with 4, 5, and 6 right now. That was the only project that I didn't get in that I wanted to in time for this meeting. But it's also the most complicated. We're dealing with a 50% request for FEMA, as well as a 428 request, meaning the footprint's going to change slightly on the new building, assuming we can get it declared 50% damage. So these larger items do take more input on our part, and they're more complicated. So the smaller ones should go faster. It's just a lot of little loose ends. Putting 10 DIs in one project also takes a long time than just one DI. But yeah, I see it going a lot faster for the last half of the year.
Any other questions? Thank you, Glenn.
Thank you.
Next, navigation. Channing?
Yes, Commissioners, 2 items. First of all, to update my report, we did get the project partnership agreement with the Corps finally signed, so that has been settled. Additionally, the partners on the channel, the Corps, Coast Guard, pilots, and industry members have taken a different or an additional approach to hurricane preparation this year in order to try and avoid the channel obstructions we had last year. The Corps of Engineers has done a survey of the channel. They've identified 170 targets, which are basically floating items, anywhere from a barge to some of these butterfly rigs that they have for shrimping that appear to be unattended and not well secured. That report's been given to the Coast Guard. We're trying to run down tracking information, contact information rather, on ownership, so if there's a storm moving into the area, we can try and get these things secured and not have things sink in the channel again this year. No promises, but at least there's an effort being made to try and avoid that. With that, I'll answer any questions you all have.
Questions? Thank you, Channing.
Thank you.
Operations, Todd?
We're currently loading a petroleum coke ship at BT1. We finished one a few days before we started this one. So we had a raw coke ship, a rutile ship, and a calcine ship at BT1 that we just finished this month. In the future, we've got 4 more calcine vessels, 2 more rutile vessels, and some coke barges that we're unloading for Alcoa. So the coke market is starting to pick back up a little bit. I'm not saying we're breaking any records here, but at least we're seeing some ships on the books, so that's a good plus. At City Docks, this past month we've done a tower ship, 6 hydrate barges, and a cargo transfer. In the future, we've got 4 more hydrate barges, another wind tower ship, and a lumber vessel that's going to be bringing in about 21,000 cubic meters of lumber. We've also booked a right around 10,200 tons of commercial milled rice. It's another Dominican Republic side load ship, and I've been having good discussions with the mills on an Iraqi ship. It looks like we may have a good shot at about 40,000 tons of milled rice towards the end, beginning of September, middle of August, beginning of September. So, if you have any questions?
Questions? Is the efficiency getting any time on handling the cargo at BT1 product getting any more efficient with
It is. We
temporary equipment?
Yes, sir. We've as far as the calcine side, everything is actually running very well. I mean, we're doing on average around 500-600 tons an hour with the calcine loading. So that's very well. Beforehand we were doing around 1,000. So we're getting, it's close. With the petroleum coke, we're getting better. We've installed a new chute to bring the coke by conveyor to the dock versus having to truck it, which saves us the expense of trucking, which is expensive, as well as the manpower for that. And so we've got the new, it's a larger bucket. It's about 39 cubic meter bucket that we can pick up that coke with. So we're getting better there. We're around 300-400 tons an hour. I want us to get up to around 600, I hope, using the mobile harbor crane. So we'll go from maybe a 10-day loading to 5 or 6. If we can do that, then we'll really start to be moving in the right direction. So it's getting better. We're not there yet, but it's getting better.
Okay. Thank you, Todd. Cargo trade development, Terrence.
Thank you, Mr. President. We're putting together a port profile for the next issue of Thrive Magazine. It's going to focus on area business and industry. Working with Media Post and your CARE group on a video and photo presentation for the upcoming legislator luncheon put on by the Chamber. Also working on a press release on the increase in lumber imports into Lake Charles. We recently handled the largest lumber vessel on record, 31,000 cubic meters. We have 2 more scheduled for August and September. And we also have a customer, Jerome Timber, that first exports into the United States came to Lake Charles.
So, Terrence, thank you for this chart that you're including in your report about the status of projects. I think it's helpful for us to know, what the status of them, so I appreciate you including that.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you, Terrence. Engineering, Nick.
Yes, sir, Mr. President. In addition to my monthly report, hurricane repair projects have progressed nicely with the majority of those early repair projects are now complete or at least in the final acceptance phase. We still have our dock repair projects that are in progress. They were delayed just due to the timber availability, but those are finally starting to kick off. We also have other projects that require more detailed inspections, such as the water towers and the spiral vapor repairs. Those are getting going now. Our other larger projects are continuing to progress through the design process. That includes berth 2 and 3, which is nearing completion now and should be going to our next board meeting, actually. Also, shed 16 and 17 should be out for bid soon for the new roof repairs. And bursts 4, 5, and 6, that design process is progressing nicely. So I'll be happy to answer any other questions you may have.
Any questions? Okay, thank you, Nick. State lobbyists, does Ginger have any? No more than what's in the written? And federal, Chuck, anything? Thank you. Okay, executive session, any other matters need to come before the board? If not, I'll entertain a motion for executive session.
I move.
Second.
Mr. Lorenzi moves, Mr. Dixon seconds. Any discussion? All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Ayes have it. We'll go into executive session.